Have you ever wondered about a country smaller than a football field? It sounds like a myth, or perhaps the punchline to a joke, but it is an absolute reality. When we think of the world's smallest nations, our minds immediately jump to the Vatican City, nestled within the heart of Rome. But there is a place that takes the concept of a micronation to an entirely different level. This is a country with no soil, no sprawling landscapes, and no natural borders. Instead, it is perched precariously on two massive, rusting concrete pillars rising out of the cold, churning waters of the ocean. Welcome to the Principality of Sealand, the most extraordinary, defined, and bizarre nation on planet Earth. To understand how a pair of concrete pillars in the middle of the sea became a sovereign state, we must first travel to the freezing, unforgiving waters of the North Sea, located about 12 kilometers off the coast of Suffolk, England. The year was 1942, and the world was consumed by the fires of the Second World War. The British government, desperate to protect London and the Thames estuary from relentless German Luftwaffe bombing raids, commissioned the construction of several offshore anti-aircraft platforms. These were known as the Maunsell forts. Among them was HM Fort Ruffs. Built in a dry dock, this massive structure, consisting of a steel deck resting on two hollow cylindrical concrete towers, was towed out into international waters and deliberately sunk onto a sandbar. For years, up to 300 Royal Navy personnel lived in the cramped, freezing legs of this fort, manning radar equipment and anti-aircraft guns. But when the war ended in 1945, the guns fell silent. The troops packed their bags, the British government abandoned the platforms, and the HM Fort Ruffs was left to the mercy of the wind and the waves, forgotten by the world. For over a decade, the fort stood empty, a ghostly relic of a bygone war. But in the 1960s, a cultural revolution was sweeping across the United Kingdom. Rock and roll was taking over the world. Yet, the British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC, maintained a strict monopoly on the airwaves, refusing to play the pop music that the youth desperately craved. This gave birth to the era of pirate radio. Rebellious broadcasters took to the seas, setting up illegal radio stations on ships just outside British territorial waters to bypass the broadcasting laws. Soon, these radio pirates realized that the abandoned Maunsell forts were the perfect, stable basis for their massive antennas. Turf wars erupted over these rusting steel islands. Enter Paddy Roy Bates, a former major in the British Army, a man of fierce independence and a visionary who was about to change the history of international law. Bates initially wanted to set up his own pirate radio station, Radio Essex. He realized that HM Fort Ruffs was uniquely positioned. At the time, international law dictated that a country's territorial waters only extended 3 nautical miles from its coastline. Fort Ruffs sat approximately 7 miles out. It was, legally speaking, in international waters. It belonged to no one. It was terra nullius, nobody's land. After wresting control of the fort from rival radio pirates in a bitter, physical struggle, Bates had a realization that went far beyond broadcasting rock and roll. If this fortress was outside British jurisdiction, and if it had been abandoned by its original creators, why couldn't it be its own sovereign territory? On September 2, 1967, which happened to be his beloved wife Joanne's birthday, Paddy Roy Bates did the unthinkable. He raised a newly designed red, white, and black flag, hoisted it up the freezing metal flagpole, and officially declared the independence of the Principality of Sealand. He bestowed the title of Princess upon his wife and declared himself Prince Roy, the absolute monarch of the world's newest country. The British government, predictably, was not amused. They viewed Bates as a nuisance and a squatter. But when they sent the Royal Navy to try and evict him, they were met with a shocking response. As a British vessel approached the fort, Prince Roy's teenage son, Prince Michael, fired warning shots across the bow of the ship. Because Roy and Michael were British citizens, they were summoned to an English court in 1968 to face serious firearms charges. The British establishment expected a swift conviction. However, in a stunning turn of events that would cement Sealand's legend, the judge ruled that because the incident occurred outside the 3-mile limit of British territorial waters, the United Kingdom courts had absolutely no legal jurisdiction over the fort. In the eyes of the Bates family, this was the ultimate victory. It was a de facto recognition. The British courts had essentially admitted that they had no power over Sealand. From that day forward, the Principality of Sealand operated with an unshakable belief in its own sovereignty. Running a country is no easy task, especially when your entire nation is a rusting metal deck in the North Sea. But the Bates family took their royal duties seriously. They know that to be recognized as a real country, they needed the trappings of a real country. They drafted a national constitution. They composed a national anthem. They began issuing official Sealand passports, which surprisingly were used to travel internationally by several individuals in the early days. They minted their own currency, the Sealand dollar, which was pegged to the value of the US dollar and featured the portrait of Princess Joanne. They even printed their own postage stamps. Though the United Nations never officially recognized them, the sheer audacity and legal resilience of Sealand captured the imagination of the world. But the history of Sealand is not just about legal loopholes and postage stamps. It is a history written in blood, betrayal, and high-stakes espionage. In the late 1970s, the tiny nation faced its greatest existential threat. A German businessman named Alexander Achenbach, who had been granted a Sealand passport and the title of Prime Minister, staged a violent coup. While Prince Roy and Princess Joanne were in England purchasing supplies, Achenbach hired a group of heavily armed German and Dutch mercenaries. They descended upon Sealand in a helicopter, storming the platform and taking young Prince Michael hostage. For several days, the prince was kept locked in a freezing cell without food or water. Prince Roy Bates was not a man to surrender his kingdom. He enlisted the help of a pilot who had worked on James Bond films, gathered a group of loyal friends heavily armed with shotguns and pistols, and launched a daring counter-attack. In a scene straight out of an action movie, Roy Bates fast dropped from a helicopter directly onto the deck of Sealand in the dead of night. The mercenaries, completely caught off guard by the sheer ferocity of the assault, surrendered immediately. Prince Michael was freed, and the mercenaries were held as prisoners of war. The incident caused a massive international diplomatic crisis. Germany petitioned the British government to intervene. Finally, Germany was forced to send a diplomat directly to Sealand to negotiate the release of the prisoners. For Prince Roy, negotiating face-to-face with an official diplomat from a major world power was the ultimate proof that Sealand was a real, recognized nation. As the decades rolled on, Sealand adapted to the changing world. In the early 2000s, during the boom of the internet, the tiny nation partnered with a company called Haven Co. to become an offshore data haven. Servers were installed in the thick concrete legs of the towers, offering completely unregulated, secure internet hosting, free from the copyright laws and restrictions of major countries. Though the venture eventually folded, it proved that Sealand was always looking for innovative ways to assert its independence and sustain its economy. They survived a devastating fire in 2006 that gutted the living quarters, rebuilding it entirely from scratch using funds raised by their royal global supporters. Today, the legacy of Paddy Roy Bates, who passed away in 2012, is carried on by his son, Prince Michael. To this day, the country sustains itself in the most unique ways. You can go online and purchase a noble title, officially becoming a lord, lady, baron, or baroness of Sealand. The country even boasts its own national football team, not recognized by FIFA, but proud members of the NF board playing matches against other unrepresented nations and regions. Usually, the permanent population of this metal fortress hovers between just 2 to 50 people, mostly caretakers and security personnel who maintain the generators and keep the flag flying high above the crashing waves. It remains a symbol of human stubbornness, a testament to the fact that with enough willpower, a man can turn a piece of abandoned concrete into a kingdom. So, what do you think about the world's smallest, small rebellious nation? It challenges our very definition of what it means to be a country. Don't forget to comment your thoughts below. And if you want to explore more incredible, untold stories from the fringes of history, make sure to subscribe to the channel.